Yes, we can begin.
Hello, welcome to the second panel of the day of our undergraduate thesis symposium called the Psychogrammars of Space. My name is Vastavikta Bhagat, and I will be moderating the panel that is located around the cultural transformations of landscapes. And for this panel, we have four works, which means four presenters that will be engaging with this question. But before I introduce our presenters, I'll just introduce our respondents, who are two distinguished scholars with us today. So we have Dr. Kush Patel, who is a faculty member in and the head of studies for the postgraduate arts program in technology and change at the Shrishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design and Technology in Manipal Academy of Higher Education in Bangalore, India. Their research and teaching remain oriented to the theme of survival as both a form and method of historical and theoretical investigations into making just environments across a range of digital and community sites. Their current projects include a history of participatory architecture and examinations of pedagogical and archival forms that campus community projects with a digital take to engage struggle against heteronormative and casteist patriarchy. They're also the co-founder of Pedagogy of the Digitally Oppressed, a digital humanities collective that is committed to fostering queer, feminist, and anti-colonial approaches to digital humanities teaching. Their writing appears in Digital Studies, Le Champ Numérique, Knowledge Justice, Disrupting Library and Information Science through Critical Race Theory, Public, a Journal of Imaging America, and more. Dr. Kush Patel is a registered architect in India with professional degrees and gold medal distinctions in architecture and urban design from South Gujarat University, Surat and Sept University, Ahmedabad respectively, as well as a Master of Science in Architectural Design Studies and PhD in Architecture from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. We also have Prasad Khanulkar, who is an assistant professor of geography at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati, India. His research as an academic and urban planner has focused on different urban issues in different cities, including Mumbai, Gurgaon, Portland, Nairobi, and Addis Ababa. His upcoming book from Routage offers a new way of thinking about slums and southern cities based on a grounded engagement with the relationship between media, objects, spaces, and people in the everyday life of slum localities in Mumbai, India. His new research focuses on how Guwahati is a labyrinth of urban circulation in Northeast, where people move through it with different temporal rhythms while using it in different ways. So the format of the panel is going to be like the previous panels, where we'll have the presenters talking from between 7 to 10 minutes, followed by responses from Kush and Prasad. I first call upon Neha Keshari. Her work is called Memoryscape, a psychogeographic understanding of the street. And she engages with the question of how does memory create a sense of space for a transformed street. And her field is basically situated in the suburb of Kandivali. Neha, do you want to start presenting?
Thank you, Vastavita. Hi, this is Neha, and I'm investigating the idea of memoryscape. When streets are designed today, they are designed in terms of efficiency, and as a result, they are seen as a product of maintaining order and restricting movement. They are designed with an engineering logic for a vehicular imagination of streets. This leads to road expansion or new infrastructure projects to relieve traffic congestion in the city and pathways to facilitate street plans efficient pedestrian movement. The thesis argues that when orthographic street plans are made for a neighborhood that is settled over the years, they are made for engineering efficiency without considering the relationship of a place to its people. When streets are transformed, new development causes certain disruption in existing relationships, practices, and memories of the street. How do one rethink the architecture of streets in order to mobilize memory in the design process to minimize the disruption that happens through transformation? So here, the idea is to map the distinction between people's memory and what exists on the site in form of transformation. Why memory? People through association recall a certain partiality to which they are emotionally linked or have assigned a specific meaning. As a result, memory aids in understanding the people's current relationship with space. We obtain a true sense of space when we think about space through memory rather than when we try to get a sense of space by reading cartographic plans, which lack imagination and personal interpretation. As a result, the question arises, how does memory create a sense of space for a transformed street? I started to understand the structure of memory by developing a relationship between memory and space through senses. Memory helps to create a sense of space for people, where deep engagement in that space further leads to a sensory experience, where senses forges an emotional response from the sight. I began my research by using memory as a tool to explore prior disruption relationship on site. Through various reading, I realized that memory creates a perception of street through association, where first element of street we associate a part of street through object, people, and their activity. Kevin Lynch in his book Image of City says the element of street helps in forming a mental image and shapes the experience of the city. Body skills and senses. A particular sense reminds us of a particular part of the street. Gaston Bachelor in Poetics of Space talks about how sensory experience has a capacity to recall past events. Emotions and time. We associate certain corner of street through time. Gianni Plasma in his essay Space, Place, Memory and Magician it reinforces that memory has the ability to concretize and disappear time. Guy Debord in Theory of Derive talks about emotions play an important role in individual movement. I'm looking at three transformed streets in Kandivali and interviewing three individuals from each. The demographic boundary for the study is only confined to those aged 40 and who remember the street prior to the transformation. The three streets are New Link Road, Westfield and MG Road. I was looking at silent comic as a drawing strategy to draw the subjective experience of the space. Drawing portrays the street as a product of changes in thoughts, emotion, and texture. When one mobilizes to think of memory, to think of space, drawing becomes a catalog of one association with space. Now I walk through the each street subjective narrative. Ashna, a single mother of 65, puts up a stall on Link Road every day. She used to decide where she currently puts up a stall before the street was transformed. She remembers the space through texture, sound, and smell, hence the perception of street is constructed through sensory experience. She had a kacha room built for her and her family, but the entire street felt like home. She recalls the green field with trees in front of her, where she used to go alone or with her friends to sleep or relax. Here for Ashna, that street edge with dense vegetation becomes her escape and relieves funds from daily household chores. Here, the street affords a moment of work space for her. Ashna used to go around in lot of spaces. One of the places was the tabela, which used to become the gathering space for many moments in neighborhood. There was no gate or any kind of boundary. The owner didn't appear to bother whether anyone utilized that space. He used to appreciate the company. Now that Tabela has a solid compound wall and gate, no one occupies those spaces. For Ashna, the link road was never a straight path. The movement of Ashna was not dictated by a particular pathway, but through her routine and daily practices and interaction that used to happen at the interface of the street. Similarly, Ramesh and his friends used to constantly search out for the things in the dumping ground or look out new ways of playing with things. The space beside the dumping ground in the open field, fishermen used to come and segregate the fishes. Now, Ramesh stroll became a stroll of a wanderer, where he continuously look out for new things in the street and the new things he can enjoy doing along the street. The street become a field where he start his inquisitive search for objects on the street to play with and also a space which allow different practices because of no boundary condition. Ajay, a 45-year-old man, is a vegetable vendor in MG Road. Ajay used to walk to the school daily by passing through the link road and has developed a sense of space created through familiarity with objects, people, and their activity on the streets. He usually used to enjoy his walk from the school to home as he passes by the market. He recalls how at every node he used to interact with the people he had met while taking his daily stroll. He also used to observe people and their activity while sitting on the bucket outside his classes, meanwhile waiting for his classes to start. Here, houses object become a street furniture, creating a pause or rest space right in the hustle of the market. For Ajay, street acts as a carnival of objects or the markers, which used to allow meandering in the street and promote sociability in an average instance. Rekha, a 65-year-old woman, used to dwell in Birla Company service quadrant. Her perception of the street is constructed through time at which specific activity uh, occur. For her, the edge was like an open canvas where she could interact and play with the inhabitants of the street. The edge used to offer multiple things because it doesn't have a vivid boundary. For instance, it became a leisure space for some worker, dwelling place for other inhabitants of the street, and workspace for other groups of individuals, hence holding network of temporal practices. Ramesh. Ramesh, a 50-year-old, used to set up his stall at Budhwar Market in SB Road. He says setting up a stall in Budhwar Market was a huge task. The roads were not as smooth as they are now, so moving the cart from MG Road to SB Road in the hot sun was a challenge. When I arrived at the market, the first thing I would do is to get behind a spot with some shade. I would largely set up my stall beneath the tree. There used to be a lot more tree, but if I couldn't locate a position under tree shade, I would link my tarpaulin shade to another existing stall and stand beneath it. Ramesh recalls the street while attempting to locate his place in the market. With its growing nature, the form of market at street edge was flexible. It would expand in response to individual needs and convenience. Through three street narrative, I realized that people's perception of street are constructed through lived experience of the street edge. The thesis finds that people's memory of street was never about the efficiency, rather they were about the other multiple logic that space afforded. I came to conclusion that street were more engaging. They hold relationship of economic and social life. People remember street through their intense sensory experiences, such as texture, smell, sight, and sound of the street, while some remember street through certain events that created certain association. The street cater to multiple people in multiple different ways, where streets are not about only movement. For instance, this street used to afford place to wander and explore, while street how it is designed today limits its movement to one direction and to limited surfaces. Earlier, it used to offer relief space through the pockets created by staggered arrangement of dwelling subject. Different size of pockets used to accommodate different activity, while today those relief spaces are seen appropriated in footpaths and the divider beneath the shade of the metro. Earlier, the street fabric used to expand in response to individual need and convenience, accommodating various multiple practices to happen at the same time due to no segregation in space, resulting in porosity and fluidity in street edges, changing the rhythm of the street. While in today's street, there are new ways of appropriation are seen in form of temporality, where part of footpath or street are claimed for specific time. Earlier, prior to Transformer Street used to afford multiple sections where the proximity of spaces changes, where the closer proximity providing intimacy at certain point for interaction. Now in today's street, interaction spaces for street vendors are formed by appropriating site-formed artifacts in the pedestrian way. The conclusion drawn are that if people memories are mobilized and redesigning street, they will afford a much more livable city space. Whereas the street has the ability to catalyze exploration, wandering, and imagination, as well as provide a retreat space, multiple practices, and promote sociability in street interface. Thank you.
Thank you, Neha. I'll now ask Rithik to start presenting. His work looks at festive spaces largely in and around Charkop, and he interrogates the relationship between the spirit of festivals or Jashan and the mahal that it creates in a jaga, which he means place.
Thank you, Afrita. I just put it on screen. Is the screen visible?
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Rithik Mali. My thesis is basically festive spaces. The concern comes from a very personal space wherein in the earlier times, families, friends, and communities used to come together and celebrate various festivals and social activities. Initially, the cities followed a community-focused development, and such as the Baitigara, the Chawls, and the row houses, which gave a bigger sense of a community feel. From daily engagements in the Chawl verandas to festival celebrations on large community levels, there were social interactions on varied levels. The less physical boundaries kind of helped them have these conversations and interactions. The festivals would bring in a change or a shift in their social relationships. The shift in these relationships kind of tied them together, brought them closer, and enhanced their social life in some sense. In the past few years, this practice has been arrested in some sense and started to fade away. The cities in India have been growing exponentially. The urban housing started to become isolated and more independent in some sense. And these new emerging housing types do not cater to such spaces of interaction, especially the festive spaces. I mean, these new spaces do not lend themselves for those specific festive activities in all its true character. The kind of joy, spirit, and engagement that was present earlier cannot be witnessed now, and therefore arresting the shift between of relationships. The aim of the thesis is to reimagine open spaces and neighborhoods for festive activities. A couple of objectives were formulated, like to gain an understanding of the Jaga Mahol and Jashan through site observations, following to investigate if there is a shift which is observed in the relationships, and on a larger scale to inquire about the different scales at which a Jashan kind of takes place. And through a set of drawings and text, whether the spaces are interactive and engaging or they are not. The research question is understanding the relationship of spirit of festivals or Jashan and the mahol that is created or contained in Jaga. So I started developing a vocabulary for myself, and kind of the whole narrative revolves around it. A few concepts which were derived from literature readings are the first one being the festivals are influenced by seasons, and the activities of the festivals kind of turn influence in the societal relationships of the people in the spaces. The second one being over the years, the built form kind of has a direct impact on festivals and as well as the community engagement on varied levels. The third one being the transformation of spaces into places of celebration, produced through physical and perceptual experiences, kind of enhance the social interactions which happen and give a sense of belonging. Research and field methodology. The study sample being the three different neighborhoods of varying densities and varying housing types. The drawing strategy, I use a couple of methods wherein the first method was using base drawings and then overlapping them with tracings and kind of developing a sense of change in space in some manner. Then the another technique was of a comparative drawing strategy wherein two drawings would directly have uh, directly speak about the shift of changes which happen. And the third drawing, which have been the cluster, a cluster drawing wherein the spaces, the way in which they're appropriated or their functionality could be explained better in these. So moving on to the field research, the first neighborhood being the Shimpoli Gautam Neighborhood. This is a 200 plus year old neighborhood wherein the Agri Koli and Bhandari communities reside. Um, Through the conversations which I had with them, I got a few things from them wherein they deal with a very limited space, and they still try to nudge and manage their activities in this space. Everyone adjusts and creates space for different kinds of celebrations like Ganesh Chaturthi, Holi, and so on and so forth. Engagement is seen from everyone present in the settlement, like a lot of engagement from the youth. And during these festivals, the kind of vibe, the vibe changes, the space kind of feels different. And throughout these years, decades, I mean, the festivals have acted as a binding agent for the Gaukaris, the villagers. These are a few pictures from the site. So here I'm starting with my base drawing wherein the main entrance, this is the space wherein all of the festive activities happen. There are two major entrances to the Basti, but this is the major entrance wherein they have this relief space. And the space is constantly active because there are people coming in and going out. During Holi, there is an element which is introduced, and the central element kind of draws people together, brings them in, and kind of creates a very different space in some sense. The following day of the Ranga Panchami, the space completely transforms itself and becomes like a very colorful space and and has a very different feel to it. The following set of drawings kind of talk about the engagements or the tasks which kind of happen, wherein some tasks are carried on by the women, some by the men, and some by the children, and then they kind of work towards finishing these tasks. Following which is the drawing of the Ganesh Chaturthi celebration. So the tight space kind of the open tight space kind of now becomes enclosed and it's completely changed in its nature. And people kind of make these negotiations and provide and contribute to the whole process of it coming together and the whole Stapna of Ganpati Bappa. And they kind of this kind of becomes a very important part of their entire life, because this is the time wherein they kind of went out their problems to the Lord and kind of connect with one another and the God. Uh, Zooming out a little bit here, I'm trying to show how tight the basti is. They have an open ground which the Gaukaris claim for themselves, which is under the BMC right now. So that the ground they kind of use it for cricket tournaments and sometimes rent it out for mal ceremonies. The good part about the space is that there are direct openings of doors and windows towards the space. So what happens is the space kind of does not become like a backyard, but like a more activated space, and it's not used for parking or stuff like that. Uh, the 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 following set of drawings, kind of the red highlighted portions, are the ones which have a direct visual and vocal connect with the space, and on the ground floor level have a physical contact with the space. Moving forward to the next neighborhood, that is the row houses in Charco. Here, this is a 40-year-old settlement which kind of Mahada row housing scheme was introduced and in Charco and kind of started building up a dense cluster of houses. So here, the residents kind of are super happy with the kind of courtyards they have, and they feel that it is of very good quality, and they appropriate the courtyard in their own way. They have a lot of sentiments and memories which are attached to the space, and they take care of each other, and they have a very healthy relationship with each other in some sense. There the engagement kind of increases during the festive period because there are a lot of arrangements which need to be made, and everyone kind of gets up and gets to work and gets all of the arrangements done. A few pictures from the site. Moving forward, I'm through the mapping models. I'm trying to show about the nature of the space, wherein the first drawing kind of shows how the entire scheme is, and following which the next drawing, kind of the highlighted portion, kind of shows one of the societies, which kind of during festive periods turns into one. The cluster kind of becomes one entire big house. Uh, a sectional drawings cut through the societies to kind of show the engagement during the non-festive period time and below the festive period time, the kind of preparations which kind of happen. These preparations kind of, become an agent of connect between these people. And then we kind of see the Navaratri celebration which is going on the left hand side on the drawing, and the acts of Jagrata, singing, playing Garba kind of happens here. A carpet is laid, and the carpet kind of becomes a stage for themselves to perform, have singing contests and stuff like that. On the right hand side, we can see that I'm trying to show that how somebody's kitchen kind of becomes a community kitchen, somebody's house kind of becomes a storage space, and somebody's house kind of turns into a staging area. So the whole cluster kind of then activates itself, that changes its function, and acts like one. Moving forward, zooming out a bit, here we are talking about the Ganesh Chaturthi celebration which happened in Charkhu, wherein not just this specific cluster, but the whole kind of surrounding kind of comes in and chips and works towards this Ganesh Chaturthi celebration, wherein they the celebration does not contain itself within the societies, but kind of bleeds out onto the streets and lightens up the entire area. Moving forward to the third neighborhood, that is the Haridas Nagar apartment buildings in Haridas Nagar. Here, this was established in 1987 with 30 residential projects coming up. So conversations I had here were very different from the ones I had in the first two neighborhoods, because here the conversations kind of spoke about how limiting the societies are in some sense. Lack of open spaces do not provide them for just celebrating festive activities, because the open spaces are appropriated by parking cars and stuff like that. And the only interactions which occur are during the festive period when people actually go outside and meet each other. The buildings which do not have a stilt, especially, have zero, like they don't have the potential of hosting these activities. The preparations also earlier used to be done by the whole societies, but now kind of are only done by the members in the board, or the yeah. A few pictures from the site. So now here I'm trying to show about the shift in scale which happens during the festivals, cutting this section through one of the buildings, and wherein I'm trying to show the above diagram kind of shows how the celebration kind of happened on the street, and there was a very different connect it had with the people around. And when after a couple of years, as the roads got busier and the road traffic kind of forced these celebrations to get into the isolated apartments, there is there is definitely some engagement which goes around in there, but the scale is completely different, contained in some sense. This is a gif which kind of shows the change. Moving forward, this is a Jashan of Navratri which happens on the ground floor in the stills. Here, I'm trying to make an argument wherein the Ganesh Chaturthi, like I mentioned earlier, the space wherein Ganpati Bappa used to sit kind of always there is a shift in that space because of the growing number of cars, the density which is the growing density of the city as well, and the kind of Bappa has to kind of move from point A to point B to find a place for himself to sit, and with and completely then shifting places here and there and completely diminishing when a bridge is constructed. So through this drawing, we are trying to show the different shift which happened. And in 2018, with the construction of the bridge, the space for the celebration kind of was taken away. The conclusion. So here I'm trying to speak about how the ability of spaces to shape relationships between people, and how people kind of appropriate and influence a space according to their own desires and make a space for themselves if the space kind of does not provide itself. Some spaces are geographically limited, but we still kind of try to bleed out onto the streets and make the space for themselves. The changing urban landscape and the new emerging building type kind of takes away that space, the very little space which is still left. Of course, in some cases, like we saw in the example before, the spaces keep jumping and shifting from place to place, and like there's a constant adjust and negotiation which is happening there. The urban public spaces are shrinking further and further, while the built forms continue to go more and more independent and isolated in some sense. These changes in the built environment and urban forms are emerging challenges with which the architects kind of need to work with. It is evident that attention needs to be focused on the quality of public space. That is one of the major things in order to enhance the festival and capture the whole Jashan. The Jashan continuing, but it is reducing at its scale. It is important to understand that the interrelationships of partial buffers and events in order to create innovative transformation of spaces from using the space for multiple uses throughout the day and throughout the seasons at large. Usefulness to architects, the importance of space in shaping the relationships among individuals of a neighborhood, and coming back to reimagining open spaces for those activities. The interrelationships which between the changing built form and the social interactions, as well as the changing external scenarios, that is the bigger scenarios, global scenarios and the local scenarios, and explore innovative ways to create and craft quality spaces for the social interactions, generating the festive mahol, and enjoying being part of the Jashan, which encourages the communities to come together on different, wider, and deeper levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Rithik. I'll call Gauri now to present her work called Urban Ruins. She engages with the question of how do certain built forms in the city become obsolete, and then how does, and she's also looking at the phenomenon of abandonment in her work. Gauri, you can start presenting.
Yeah, you can see the screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The city of Bombay has seen multiple economic shifts from being a mercantile city, which used to majorly run on trading activities, to an industrial city, which was a hub for production of large goods. Hence, various mills came up during this time, and then it slowly started transitioning into a service-based economy. These economic shifts lead to the occurrence of several dilapidated and unused buildings within the city. These forts, docks, mills occupy large portions of city land and are often placed within dense life which has emerged. The materials we see in these structures respond to the time that they were built in, add to the old grace of these abandoned structures, which are contrasting yet somehow weave perfectly with the urban fabric. They become curious spots in the contemporary everyday life of the city. We become curious about them because either there is restricted access or they are sealed. This is why we know very little about their history, as they are screened from our everyday transactions with the city. The mystery in these spaces allures us, but at the same time makes us hesitant towards accessing them. Yet, people in the immediate surroundings engage in multiple ways with these peripheries due to their own exigencies. Through this research, I'm looking at the questions that we have in our mind on encountering abandoned sites in our urban environment. How does the city survive abandonment? What do abandoned sites offer to the city? What were these structures? What context produced them? And what was the life it sustained? Through the study of three such cases, Vasai Fort, Sassoon Docks, and Khadi Gramodyog, the thesis tries to understand ways in which abandoned sites adapt or adjust to the altering socio-economic needs of the city. I construct an architectural ethnography of these sites through the documentation of historical narratives of abandonment, as well as a close observation of their material conditions. I will be taking you through these places I have picked as I experience them. They are incomplete because of my perspective and position. There is no way to know what has gone missing and what was never there in the first place. However, among these are tales of vitality, survival, and presence of a life lived within and around these lively ruins in Mumbai. The first site that was chosen was Mumbai Khadi and Village Industries Association, locally known as Kora Kendra, is located in a dense urban fabric in the suburbs of Mumbai. What once was huge acres of farming land is now like an oasis in the concrete desert. The place is unknown to most people due to its lack of usage and accessibility. It was set up in 1946 by a few freedom fighters to strengthen the Swadeshi movement and establish a platform for rural artists from across India. There are different departments that carry out the production and packaging of various products like honey, soap, ghani oil, agarbatti, dyeing, pottery, which operates in different parts of the complex, but have a basic pitched roof structure with steel portals, which are more or less the same throughout the complex. With movable furniture inside, like partition walls, chairs, and tables, which allow some flexibility of function. As you walk into the complex, you may notice material changes that have taken place over time to ease out the maintenance of these structures. The Mangalore tile roof has now been replaced with a metal sheet. The wooden door openings have been transformed into openable steel shutters, giving the space an industrial feel. These changes are slow, but they might eventually transform the place completely, or they might not. Over the years, various activities like making matchsticks, leather chappals, and weaving has stopped as the city has found easier alternatives and the demand for them has reduced. Finding appropriate labor and facilities for them was just not possible, which eventually leads to the abandonment of the workspaces of these activities. This space is alive, but it will die soon. Also, it is already dead. The roof is broken, and all left are the steel portals, still standing strong and tall, covered in rust, supporting the creepers over them. The roof is covered with broken materials from the roof. The floor is covered with broken materials from the roof and leftover furniture. But within all this, some plants have managed to take on a new life. In this dead landscape, the plaster peeled off from the walls, cracks showing off the bare brick wall beneath it. I could smell cool dirt, damp wood, and old brick. This place was formed with a certain ideology, which no longer correspond with the use of newer materials that have been seen coming up in the complex. Also, the place fails to connect with the people in the surrounding areas. They are unaware of the presence, and hence, it isn't used up to its full potential. As per the development plan, the region comes under the excluded part, which is a major reason for its slow and delayed development. Wrapped up with the tall residential buildings, The place is a metaphor for what it means to live within the process of slow collapse. The second site that was chosen was Bassein Fort, locally known as Vasai Killa, was built by the Portuguese in 1536 and has been used as an economic, political, and military base for 300 years. It has 3 convents, 6 churches, and 1 cathedral, as well as countless public and private structures. Even though much of this medieval fort city has fallen into despair, numerous watchtowers remain. The Kolivara staying on the adjacencies are strongly connected with the fort that depend on it for water, play, and educational and religious purposes. Every year, in the second week of January, the Christian Colis celebrate the Vasaikilla festival near the St. Gonzalo Garcia Church. A carnival is set up outside the church during this time, where stalls which sell toys, clothes, utensils, and food come up. People interact with the fort on a large level due to its historical importance, and they attract a lot of tourists. In the city, due to lack of open space, people look out for such spaces. The accessibility to them and the experience is what brings them back. They use it for the purpose of leisure, play, intimacy, and creative inspiration. The old rusted spaces in the fort are occupied by various user groups during different times of the day, giving the dead spaces a new life. While it is important to conserve such engagement and promote them, these spaces are often left with scribbles on the wall and used irresponsibly as the users are unable to connect with them and hence understand their importance. The last site that was chosen was the Sassoon Docks. The Sassoon Dock is one of the oldest docks constructed in the year 1875 and was built to establish cotton trade, situated in the South Mumbai area of Kalam. After the downfall of the cotton textile industry in Mumbai, the dock started shutting down as the godowns were no more in use. The new Sassoon, the new Sassoon Dock was constructed in 1995. Presently, it is it is the main fishing jetty of Mumbai with the iconic fish market. Due to age, the existing godowns within the old Sassoon Dock have become dilapidated. The fishing industries majorly depend on their daily activities on the dock. The dock brings in a lot of people due to the fish market and the tourists and artists for its heritage importance. Despite being extensively used on a daily basis, there are unused dilapidated parts in the complex that can be bought to use by conserving them ethically within the given guidelines. While it is critical to while it is also critical to retain the importance and history of the place. These everyday encounters and interactions with these ruins are important. They connect people, places, histories, and futures, and something that needs to be preserved. It is important to analyze the predicted useful life of a building by considering the physical, economical, functional, social, legal, and political factors. Also, it is critical to understand what it what is to be preserved and why it should be preserved, and be able to let go of what is not important. While studying these structures, one realizes that it is not just the old structures and the old materials that we have a charm and appreciation for, but it goes further ahead. The immediate surroundings and the changes in them is what create an overall experience. Through such an approach, one may be able to establish the ethics of conservation and repurposing leftover spaces which often get transformed into quick capitalistic forms.
Thank you, Gauri. Is Mahek here? Yeah, she's here. Okay. Mahek will present her work titled Spaces of Lived Experience, a case study of Chawl redevelopment. Here she engages with the question of what is the architectural transformation of a chawl, which retains the life of the inhabitants. So, Mahek, do you want to present?
Yeah, I will present. Is my screen visible?
Yeah, I think it's coming. Yeah, we can see.
So my topic is Spaces of Lived Experiences, a case study of Chawl redevelopment. The main trigger of selecting this topic is that I have lived in a Chawl for 13 years and then moved into a redeveloped apartment. During this transformation, a lot of things change around a person, not just partially, but also into their everyday routines and lives. After being told that these changes would ensure a better lifestyle for each individual, but at what cost? Before the move, people were often seen dreaming about living in the apartments and now recollecting and remembering the happy memories of a chawl. Everyone had a story from their days in the chawl, but none had a story from their lives in the apartments. This brings me to my concern that in a neighborhood, when a chawl shifts to an apartment, it brings about a transformation that creates a different register of life, which is sometimes awkward and difficult to live with, and sometimes creates a different aspirational space. The research objective here is to identify the changes that happens before and after the transformation, and the aim is to work out a spatiality where the transformation that happens is able to continue the form and life that is conducive to their everyday relationships. The question here is, what is the architecture of transformation of a chawl which retains the life of the inhabitants? Looking at the operative concepts, it has been observed that there has been an extensive redevelopment of these chawls in the suburbs of Mumbai in the past few years. This has led to a larger scale of urban renewal or transformation at a neighborhood level, building level, as well as at individual homes. The three major kind of transformation being studied is the physical or the spatial transformation, which is directly connected to the patterns and the experiences of the lived spaces. The second is the social transformation, where the changes in the different relationships between the community, family, neighborhood, etc. are observed. And finally, the economic transformation, where the maintenance and the affordance of space is put into question. All these transformations lead to changes in different practices and routines, as well as the consumption of new activities. The method for this research is that the data has been collected by walking through the neighborhood, observing the site, and capturing images of different things that have conducted a series of conversations with individuals about their experiences going through this transformation. Research units here are the larger neighborhood changes and three chawls that have later been transformed into apartments. The drawing strategy is other sketches and detailed exometric views of before and after the transformation, showing the lives of people and patterns of lived experiences. Changes in the neighborhood. The chawls created a series of empty pockets between the structure, adding to the spaces of interactions. But after the redevelopment, these empty pockets have been eaten by these mass stacked up blocks of the apartment. The boundary wall facing the main road has disappeared, creating shop fronts. The corridors of the chawl created a blurred space between the indoor and the outdoor space, indoor and the outdoor. Since most of the chawls had lower height, it made it easier to have eyes on the street compared to the higher heights of the apartments that create a disconnect with the ground. The only connection between the indoor and the outdoor spaces in the redeveloped apartments are the windows, which in most cases are inaccessible due to the height of the project. During this transformation, a lot of old tenants have moved out and a series of new tenants move in. The tenants are of a new and higher class compared to the ones living in the chawl. This plays a major role in changing the neighborhood. All the amenities in the neighborhood now undergo redevelopment and are cater to the new class of people. The older local kirana stores and vegetable markets have now become supermarts and hypermarts. The previously open parking on the ground now needs to pay a hefty amount of money to buy a parking space, and the whole new series of occupations have come into play. The idea of security and privacy has now changed. The previously open chawls now have security guards at the gates and a 24-hour CCTV surveillance throughout the building. The Jayanand Chawl was a G+3 story L-shaped chawl with toilets on both ends and a staircase block in the middle. It had a large open ground at the center used as parking during the night and various activities during the day. The L-shaped corridor faced the ground, providing adequate amount of light and air ventilation. The redeveloped Amisara Apartments is an 8-story structure with a tiny central lobby or corridors with apartments on both sides. The tiny offset all around, there is no more any open space for any kind of activities. The 42-year-old Deepak owns a car but cannot afford a parking space in the apartments and hence has to park his car on the streets. Previously, he would just park it on the ground and didn't have to worry as there was always someone overlooking the ground. Since now it's a gated community, installing CCTV surveillance and hiring a watchman would mean a great increase in the monthly maintenance cost compared to the 25 rupees monthly rent he paid while living in the chawl. This brings in the idea of security and affordance before and after the transformation. The 72-year-old Prabha talks about her social relations where now she feels lonely, where she feels lonely at the new apartment. When her kids were at school or offices, she would often go lurk around at the neighbors' homes and occasionally have lunch with them. Now everybody has their doors closed at all times and she feels door closed at all times. The second site, Anand Bhuvan, was a site with two chawls facing each other with a large central ground and a common entrance for both the chawls. One of them was a G+3 story long chawl, while the other was a G+2 L-shaped chawl. The spaces in these chawls were either single rooms or a one-room kitchen. The toilets were located on the ground at the back of the chawl. Palace Royal was a 17-story building with two wings, where the older tenants live in the B wing, while the new ones occupy the A wing. The 27-year-old Abhijit looked forward to the weekends where all his friends from the chawl would meet up and play different sports and celebrate all the festivals together. The people overlooking it from the corridor, the ground would shift from a parking space to a stadium to a mandap. Now that huge central ground has turned into the stall, hollow, circulation shop, which is hardly ever used, with no sense of outdoor spaces in the apartments. The 22-year-old Shikha was asked to enter the building from a different gate by the watchman. She says that she has faced the discrimination when the two wings of the apartments face in opposite direction, while the old residents face the surrounding buildings, where the new residents face a larger open area with the adjoining road at front. The two wings have no connection with each other spatially or socially compared to the chawl, where they faced each other with direct visual connections. The third site is the Mangal Murti chawl, which is an L-shaped chawl with 14 rooms on each floor. The staircase block is placed at the center of the L. The toilet blocks are located on the ground floor at the back of the chawl, which is now transformed to Pearl Heights, which is a 10-story building with 4 1 BHK apartments on each floor, and toilets now got inside the flats. The 18-year-old Josh is extremely happy about this new shift. He says that he was extremely embarrassed about sharing a tiny room with 3 other people and carrying a bucket of water every day to the common toilets, and hence he never brought any of his friends back home to hang out. He had to share everything with everyone at all times. He says that he couldn't even watch a movie without someone interrupting him every 5 minutes. This all has changed since he moved into the apartments. He now has privacy. He has his own bedroom where he can do anything he wants and doesn't have to work according to other people's schedule. Similarly, for the 53-year-old Manisha, staying in a single room meant doing everything together as a family. The spaces of the rooms of the chawl were overlapped as time according to the time and need. Everyone had dinner at the same time so that the room can later become a sleeping space for everyone and wake up together so that it can become a living room later. She looked forward to everyone discussing about their day and watching TV together. Now everyone is in their own rooms doing their own things and only talking to each other whenever necessary. Uh, so in the inferences where the new redeveloped projects may be more spacious, it has no connection to any kind of social activities where the spaces like staircases and corridors are merely used as a space to commute compared to as the chawls where most of the lived experience happens. The new apartments are specifically designed to create a class difference between the older occupants and the new ones with a specific way of arranging the spaces. In the Chawl, you see a gradual transformation between the indoor and the outdoor, where one enters the compound, goes through the common ground, staircases, and the corridors to enter their own private space, creating a blur between the indoor and the outdoor spaces, compared to the sharp distinguish between the indoor and the outdoor spaces in the apartments. Due to the higher number of rooms on each floor of the chawl, there is a constant flow of people where everyone, which contributes to the interactions with everyone at all times of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahek. I'll just quickly summarize the four works, and then we can either call upon Prasad or Kush to respond, whoever wants to go first. So Neha, in her work, she's talking about the lived experiences and the multiple logics that constitute to the memory of a street edge, and then how can one mobilize these logics to think through livable spaces beyond the trope of efficiency? While Rithik, he's trying to draw out through his work the shifts in the relationships of people and the scales at which a jashan or a festival or an event takes place, and the changes that it brings and how it has changed through time with new spatial types that have emerged. While Gauri's stories, which are interesting around the ideas of vitality and survival, what she hopes to do with them is also approach the ethics of conservation and repurposing leftover spaces meaningfully, which often get transformed into quick capitalistic forms. And lastly, Mahek, she is trying to engage with the spatiality of transformation itself that is taking place. And what she wants to do is she wants to be able to continue she wants to interrogate the form and the life that is conducive to the everyday relationship that it holds. Kush, Prasad, anyone can. I'm going to take names. Yeah.
Okay, I can attempt and start us off. Unless Prasad, you had something which is on your mind and you have to let it out and share with the rest.
Okay. No, go ahead.
So, I'm still sort of processing your presentations. There were 4 of you who are looking at different dimensions of transformation. And it's interesting to sort of see the types of spaces that interest you and ways in which you've engaged with them. For some of you, these are also the spaces that you've inhabited yourselves, and sort of the transformation is deeply personal. And for others of you, it came across as sort of something that you've observed in the changing landscape of the city, and you feel sort of a sense of connection by virtue of asking questions about their histories, but also their futures. And here I'm referring to Gauri's work about sort of, the changes to questions of urban heritage and meanings that remain unarticulated. What's interesting is that each one of you also had a very specific way of drawing these engagements, right? So Memoryscape, Neha's project on the psychogeographic understanding of the street. It's beautiful the way you sort of walked us through the various textures of the street, but located the experience in specific names and in specific individuals. So at times the street was just a place to be. At other times the street became a searching ground. Still other times it was a place to feel less alone. And then there was also this notion of the street in the fourth story as time itself. And then finally you conclude with this understanding of street as shelter. So you provide a very fine-grained understanding of what street is, as opposed to it having a kind of a universal value. And I really appreciated that, because those stories really sort of embodied what you concluded with, is this idea of multiple logics, but I would say all multiple ontologies, or sort of ways of being and kinds of realities of streets that are being formed and or lived through. My question to you, Neha, is yes, I mean, there is this, our default conclusion is that there's something that we lose with a preoccupation around efficiency, that efficiency makes us lose something. But what my question is that, yes, one, what is lost through efficiency? What is reclaimed in balancing life and this drive towards efficiency as these streets get to be reformed and becoming much more utilitarian? And what is the critical dimension of the street that upholds this tension? So I want to sort of hold this tension between something which was a space of rest, time, shelter, search, and even a place to feel less alone, to something which is becoming much more utilitarian and a thoroughfare and a means to go from point A to point B. But how do we sort of move past this binary of losing everything or becoming too nostalgic about what we've lost, and keep alive this tension of claiming and reclaiming? And as an architectural researcher, then what is that critical dimension that upholds this tension for you? To Rithik's project, very interesting, sort of this understanding of the festival, and it was quite sort of descriptive and clear in your presentation of how from a Gautam to a Mada housing scheme to a much more present day clustered gated residential development are all speaking to this idea of the festival. So, and I think you also were very careful in each case study, so to speak, to locate festival spatially. So whether it occupies an open space, whether homes become a place for festival, or in the third case of kind of a gated residential development, the compound becomes a little sort of opening for the festival to take place. But my question to you is, you were approaching how festival gets to be accommodated or not with these spatial developments and changes. But my question is, what is the changing nature of the festival itself? Through this research, how is it allowing you to characterize festival itself differently? And that would be a unique sort of way to sort of reflect on at the end of this research, so that it's not one which is static and the other which is changing, but one is also sort of thinking about, if festival is also a social construction as much as space is, what is the shift in how we understand festivals? That becomes a point of conversation with space. Gauri, again, I love the presentations. There was your choice of black and white visual narrative. Almost, there was a lot of pause in each slide, and you walked us through three very unique places, right? I mean, thank you for introducing me to these locations. I was unfamiliar with them, and so except for one of them, but so there is the Mumbai Khadi and Village Industries Association project in Borivali from 1946. Then there is the Bassein Fort from 1536, and then there is a Sassoon Dock from 1875. And it's interesting that you were able to sort of walk us through these different geographies. But then my question to you is, how did you make these selections? And very simply, why or why not did you choose to delve into one of those histories more deeply? What is the value addition that you gain when you do a comparative study across moments in history which speak to this question of abandonment? Because I think if abandonment is understood not as, again, something which we see or associate with decay, but there is something else that comes through in and with the question of abandonment. What is abandonment? What is it? So that is my question for you. And last but not least, with Mahek's project on this shift from chawls to apartment dwellings, and I hope Meera Adarkar is here, who can sort of engage as in this conversation on chawls as well. And it's interesting, right? Because you said you've lived in a chawl for 13 years before you moved to an apartment. What's unique about your study is that you chose 3 cases, which were each a very deliberate transformation of the chawl to residential developments in that same location, right? So what is the population that got rehoused in the modern development? Because I didn't get a sense of that. Yours was one of the families that continued to sort of live in the same location, but moved from chawl to the modern apartment. But were there other families that did so? Which families chose not to do so, and why? Where did they move to? And what does that say? Which locations did they move to? So which is a way to sort of ask and move past this, again, rather simplistic sort of binary between, because we start with this, right? That, we've lost something when we moved. And I want us to sort of, because it's a research project, it's a dissertation, I want you to sort of think about what continuities do you honor, which changes are welcomed. And if you can sort of reflect on that dialectic, on that tension, that would open up this question of what space becomes and or not in the question of housing and its transformation. So I'll pause there. Thank you.
Hi. Thanks, Kush, for going first. It just gives me time to think a bit more. So, I'm going to take a little different route to think about the projects. So, in some ways, all the projects are thinking about a certain sense of what is being lost or being abandoned, or a certain sense of ruins, right? And all the 4 projects very in different ways, but also with a careful attention, paying attention to what is being lost, right? Through ideas of Memoryscape, through ideas of Jashan, through ideas of urban ruins, or spaces of lived experience that have changed, right? And you kind of look at the architecture of what is being lost, right? But I'm also going to ask you to push to think about the architecture of how do you gather what is lost, right? In terms of both drawings, but also the strategy of who you're talking to and how do they gather what is being lost, right? For example, the idea of wandering through what is being lost is a particular way of actually reconstructing memory, right? It's not just about the street becomes a space of wandering, but wandering itself through history, through the city as a way of gathering, things that might not be in connection, right? Because these spaces aren't necessarily in connection, like one tabela here and something there, but they're sort of being gathered also, right? So does the street as a carnival, right? It's a way of bringing things together that don't necessarily go together, right? So there's also architecture strategies that are involved in a collection of memory or gatherings of things, right? Which are being lost, but you're sort of holding on to them. Right? For Neha, there's a way in which they think about or have memories of the street, right? But there's also an architecture in which they are rewriting what the street was about, right? It was about a wandering, it was about carnival, it was about an open canvas. It was about, the hardships of setting up a shop. So in each of them, there's also a way of putting things together through memories, right? So memory is not so much about just remembering, but also sort of rewriting what is being remembered, right? So there's a strategy involved in doing that, right? And so also to pay attention to that as a way of maybe thinking about design, architecture and design itself, right? But also a way of sort of, how do you draw a wandering sort of space, right? In case of Rithik, again, the Jashan wasn't just about the space that is lost, but it's, historically, I think it's a term about, a ritual of fire to which people kind of come together that is sort of disappearing, right? Again, it's a moment of gathering things that have in some sense you're seeing that are being lost, right? And as you move from, say, a basti, what you call a tight basti, and then there's the loose space, right? So there's a tightening of things and there's a loosening of things that happen in right? There's a thing of the courtyards which kind of open up into and sort of merge into one thing, right? So all these, ideas of gathering have, again, a way of, if you look at it carefully, there's some sense of an architectural form to it of tightness and openness, sort of merging and sort of reclusing. And in the last one that you kind of look at, where you say that has in some sense disappeared, right? But the disappearance is also a moment of something new that can appear, right, in that kind of a space, which, so far it looks like just the street and the still space, if I'm not wrong. But if one is to think about, again, just not just as a space for that event, but also that it's an event or as a process of where people come together and do things, right? And in an apartment type, I feel like there's a gathering of a different kind that starts occurring, right? You might not find the same events in an apartment type, but the nature of the gathering might have changed, right? What they gather for also might have changed, right? So it'll be interesting to actually look at what the new kind of a gathering looks like and what are they gathering for, what is being gathered in that architectural form, and then sort of think about, rather than it, so it might not so much be about loss of what, is, but also what is becoming at this point in time, right? The interesting thing also is that all three of them exist simultaneously in the city space, right? It's not as if one is transition. It's not like a past into the present, right? It's not a historical sense, but they all three are there, right, at this moment in time. And so is there a way of, connecting rather than saying that there's a loss of gathering space, but how do you, what I'm suggesting is more of a strategy to think about it, not in terms of loss, but in thinking about it, architecture strategy. In each of them, there's an architectural strategy which can allow you to speculate on what can happen. Right? If Gauri, again, I felt like the three cases were interesting, and there's a fortress which is, so all three are in different points in time of history. Right? So one is Vasai Fort, which has a longer history. Then there's the Sassoon Dock, which has a more, colonial history. And then you have the Khadi, which is the freedom fighters. And each of them have a specific history, right? And the architectural form also relates to that history in some ways, right? And as you were describing them, I felt that, the Khadi village in some sense seemed the most stubborn, right? It doesn't lend itself to change and it becomes a ruin. The Sassoon Dock in some sense has transformed, right? So it has a particular history, but also a form that allows it to move, right? But the Vasai Fort also, so in each of them, there's, so architecture can also be stubborn in some ways, right? When it's so forced with a sense of an identity and, what it can be, as against a more open kind of an architectural form that emerged during colonial time, right? Or a fortress. So each of them are being, had a particular purpose, but they're also, stubborn in some way. So history can also be stubborn architecturally, but also can stubborn in how it lends itself to us today, right? So is there a way of, recollecting this history, architecture history in the city, to think about not just the architectural strategies that were there in each of these types, right? And what are they giving us today in the present, right? What can we gather from them to rework them in today's time, right? A Khadi might not, and so how do you use what is ruined to speculate on what can be based on what is going on at this point in time, right? And Mahek, I kind of felt just connected to questions of what seemed to me was so much about a sense of what was in common, right? What was held in common by a lot of these inhabitants, right? So the staircases and, being able to see in the open space, being able to interact with each other through, right? The overlaps, right? Which become a common shared spaces for, right? So Chawl, in many ways, given the form, allowed for a lot of things to be held in common, right, between the residents, right, based on the restrictions that the form imposed or people's wanting to connect to each other, right? A form can also be, in some sense, very restrictive, that you are always in the eye of who's there, right? So one of the stories about this guy, who's wanting to invite his, or a child who's wanting to invite his friends without being interrupted, right? But now he has a private space. So there's, there's a desire for a new thing, but also mourning of what was, right? But in some sense, I felt like a lot of what is lost was the sense of what was held in common, right? The common infrastructures of the staircases, the common toilets, and the common, the ground in which people could, which have been replaced again by, in some sense, either private toilets, but also a different kind of an infrastructure, right? A security guard, and then a supermarket, and then like a huge elevator block with its staircases, right? So the nature of what is now in common itself has changed to a different form of an infrastructure, right? While the older forms of common infrastructures were not just the physicality, but also the sociality of it, And so how do you rework, common infrastructures to think about new forms of socialities within an apartment type, right? Where, it doesn't so much, because, it doesn't so much become our just sense of what has disappeared, but the disappearance again is a moment for something to be done, right? So something has gone, it's a in some sense a open canvas to now speculate, right, with what is there. So are there clues in the kind of common infrastructures that you find in the apartment types that that have a possibility to be reworked into something else, right? But there's also a thing of a different kind of a relationship, because it's not the old community. There's new people who've come, right? What you call the high class people, and a new kind of an infrastructural relationship is also there with the staircases, and so it's a question of how do you build on what is there to. What I'm trying to say is that how do you not think about it just as a sense of what is lost, but using what is lost to rework what is there in the present, right? So how do you sort of do how do you sort of bring them together to maybe create something, certain spaces that need to be broken down, certain spaces that need to be reconstructed. So how do you kind of bring that past and present together to rework as an architectural form, right? Okay, so that is what I had so far. Thanks.
The presenters want to respond?
Yeah, I would like to respond. So answering to Kush's question about how the sites were selected. So to begin with, the question, so I was very intrigued by and I wanted to research on about like the concern that what are these abandoned sites, and then I was just collecting places that I was able to access, and the narrative was built on later on that depending on the kind of samples that I had an access to, that and then this whole narrative was formed that these are spaces that have gotten abandoned because of the socio-economic changes that have happened in the city. So that is why these sites were chosen. And the reason of choosing three sites, three different sites, is because if you see in the three different sites, it spans across various levels of publicness and the access that one has to the public. Like if you see in the Khadi Gramodyog, it is a very privately owned property, and the activities that happen there are very much in control of the organization. Whereas as you move further to the Sassoon Docks, there it is in some spaces people can occupy certain area, like it is open to public, whereas a few places are restricted by the fishing industries. So there is this varying level of publicness, and whereas in the fort it just blurs, like anyone and any person can occupy the space. Then yeah, and if you as you see across the publicness, the varying publicness of the space, what Prasad was talking about, the stubbornness, and that is where you can see because the ownership is varying in these three sites, even the stubbornness of adapting to the context is seen changing, and that is why I thought that it would be a study across these spaces where I could see what are the ways that people interact with these sites. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to respond to Kush's question of what is loss and what through efficiency and what is
Be a
gained.
little loud.
Sorry. Now am I audible? So I would like to answer the Kush question. What is loss through efficiency and what is gained? So, what is lost is basically the soundscapes of the street, which people remember through their memory. Everybody has that perception of the street, and then this soundscape holds the individual emotions. And while having asking in their interviews also, they were responding to the places where they were emotionally attached to in some way. So, these soundscapes hold the emotional responses of the people where earlier street used to help where earlier street used to guide individual movement by the emotion, and today what is it happening is the streets are constructed in a linear manner, so people are forced to go in a linear manner, so it doesn't helps to explore in any particular manner. So through interviews also they were associating street with how today's street is been made. So it was like कि इधर ये नहीं था पहले ऐसे था, it was ये नहीं था ऐसे था. So So, but while drawing and by understanding the background of how they came to interviews, I came to conclusion that okay, there was spaces where they support relief spaces, overlapping practices, and then wondering. But now also somehow people have find the ways to be in this by appropriating what is it today. So they use footpaths and dividers for their resting spaces. So they use street objects which are discarded to appropriate in their spaces. So the idea of moving past of to claiming and reclaiming is, I would be, I have to think more about that to more understand what should be in between and what tension it holds.
I
Can I
go
go?
next.
I think anyone.
Yeah, please go. Please go.
First, to answer first question about the number of people moving out, I would like to say that there are around one or two families out of 10 who usually move out of the choice. The major reason for them moving out is the affordance of the place. Uh, so what happens is, so the people who move out generally sell their apartments from apartments, and they buy a new flat near the outskirts of the city, which is comparatively more affordable. Places like Vasai Virar are the major places where people have moved out from the choice. Um, the yeah, and the idea of what is lost here is, I'd say, majorly the social relations at the larger level, as well as the family relations at individual homes level. Like every home has the relationship with even within the family has changed due to these partial changes. So that is one of the major aspect that is lost, the social relations, the spatial relations. And what new should be accepted? The idea of one of the stories did suggest the idea of privacy, the idea of living in one's own comfort, which has now increased in the apartments, privacy and comfort level. But yeah, so so both the things are like may go hand in hand. Like one, like I've said, like one does have the desire to have a more comfortable and living lifestyle, but after moving, it's always like people always recollect the dreams of, recollect the memories of what used to be, or the social relations that they had from the Chawl, which is similar to what Prasad said. And to get to Prasad's question about how to bring both of these things together is, I think, what would be my next step further in this design of how to get both these things together. Uh, yeah, so partially which can hold both these kinds of relations. Yeah.
So I was trying to kind of understand these observations which were given us, and I'd like to spend some more time with them. But there are a few things which came to my mind, and I'd like to respond very quickly. First, I'll go with Kush's question, wherein he is trying to ask a question wherein what not the space, but what is a shift or a change which is observed in the festival itself. And in some sense, I mean, it is, I mean, through these readings and these inquiries which are done on site, a very strong statement kind of came in front of me, wherein spaces impact festivals impact spaces. We as observers are just present there, observing and engaging at varied levels. The interesting part about that is how one of the elderlies kind of told me that when they were in their youth, in their 20s and their 30s, while during the Visarjan, they used to carry Ganpati Appa on their head and kind of used to chant all of those religious Ganpati Appa songs and the mantras kind of. But now, after like 40, 50 years, I mean, the way in which the festival changes, like they have a music system and they dance to Bollywood music. So the space doesn't change, the festival doesn't change, but the way in which we are inhabiting, or their jashan kind of change. And I feel that I mean, I don't know if it's going in the in that direction, but I mean, that is another observation which I had. So a gray zone probably in between. And but I'd like to further upon inquire about that. Responding to uh, uh, Prasad's idea, what is being lost, I feel, I mean, something that they take with them would be the memories. But one interesting thing which happened is once that, like you mentioned, when a space kind of when Jashan disappears and it reappears somewhere else or in a different manner. So what happened was as the society kind of got occupied with cars and all, they had to bleed out onto the streets. Their space kind of became more open, right? And it became a space of engagement with the outsiders as well, not just the society people. And when the cars kind of the road got busy, it kind of moved on to the bigger road. So they got a bigger space, and then they started having these different performances inside. So the space kind of increased, and the activities kind of different kind of activities were introduced. So I feel just if they're giving out something, they're receiving a lot more in some sense, and it is pretty interesting in some way. So yeah, I'll have to think more about these. But thank you, Prasad, thank you, Kush.
Yeah. I think another interesting point was the idea of gathering and using that as a strategy to even draw and then think about the strategy of design as well. But I think we have some time, so we can take some other responses also from the audience, or if anybody else wants to respond.
Okay, sorry if there's nobody. I just wanted to, like Gauri, just in your case, I was just thinking of, I mean, it reminded me of two interesting projects. One recently in Dubai, I've seen where there's this area called the Al Sif, which in some ways, there was this whole, I mean, huge transformations happening and everything, and suddenly everybody was asking, where's the history, of this place? And so overnight, you have a new development that comes up, which mimics the old. So it's like spanking new development, but it has like, it looks like it's a ruin, and so you start seeing cracks and plaster peeling and everything, but it's actually brand new. And then I've seen this other place in China again, which is, in the outskirts. And suddenly you have this, it's the Thames town, and suddenly it's like, again, part of England, which is there. And again, the idea of the ruin comes in there, and you see the patina and all of that, right? So I'm just thinking of like, what does it, when you talk about the ethics of conservation, it'd be very interesting to kind of understand what is that ethic, what is it that the idea of the abandoned, the idea of the ruin, what does it have to say? And, how do you sort of frame it? I think that will be interesting to kind of explore or sort of investigate a little bit further, because there's also there's a kind of visuality of this idea of the ruin that doesn't desist capitalist forms, actually kind of is appropriated by capitalistic forms. So, I mean, that will be interesting to kind of think about a little bit more. So just kind of think about it.
Yeah, I would like to respond to that. Like, while I was doing all of these readings, so there were these different ways of how you look at conservation, and the thing that was very particular in like what struck me was it was written that conservation can't just be looked in a way that you replicate what is there in the past, because the conditions that produced a certain context, to produce those conditions once again is difficult, because then it is like as if life denying. You are not ready to accept that things have changed, but you just want to create a replica of it. And that is the whole point, where I'm looking at how these things have adapted and what is the new form and of looking at conservation. And secondly, I just forgot what I was. Sorry, I will get back to it if I remember. But yeah, so that was one of the things.
I just wanted to connect these dots and to Rupali's examples. I think one of the things that also connects the four projects is nostalgia. There's a certain sort of nostalgia of the past, or whether it's of the domestic environment, whether it's of a particular urban precinct or notions of the street itself. And, architecturally, I mean, even the examples that Pali just cited, architecturally, we've known, even historically, that nostalgia can be quite a conservative or sort of practice or sort of approach to nostalgia in architecture has often lent itself to very conservative ways of building and rebuilding environments. And by conservative, I mean both dominant in society, what the worldviews might be, but also literally conservative in terms of what the dominant group might want to conserve as its own history. So the question for this panel would be then as to how might you approach nostalgia differently, or at what scale might you start approaching nostalgia? So it's not to sort of abandon nostalgia or to sort of say that nostalgia is limiting in its scope and possibility because of its co-optation by conservative forces. But if nostalgia is valuable, if it is valuable, then at what scale is it relevant? And accordingly, how and whose memories and experiences get to be valued and brought out in ways that still responds to the close observations that you've each made. I think that's a question that I noted down here, but I mean, it's interesting that we're sort of thinking about it in relation to some of the more contemporary projects as well.
I think we have a question from Drishti Mehta. Okay. So Drishti says, I have two questions that I'd like to ask if any of the presenters, if they'd like to respond first. The first is methodological. I'd like to know how the interviews have been made sense of. And the second is conceptual. More presentations utilize the term memory. And I was wondering what sort of conceptualization of memory has been used herein. Yes.
Can I respond to the first one? Yeah. So, so while deciding the sample study, we also decided the kind of actors I wanted to speak to and ways in which I could, not be like an interviewer, but more like someone who's amongst them and trying to have a conversation and trying to collect information from them. And so I started speaking to the workers first at first, all of the shop owners and the workers first, and tried to get acquainted with them and through their stories. And I mean, it took a lot of time for them to open up, but as we started opening up, I got to know a lot of more things. A lot of other questions started coming up in my head. And then so a narrative was built then moving forward, I went on to the houses and got a very different kind of an approach in their thinking, and it kind of gave a different dimension to my thoughts about the whole space. So yeah.
So responding to the first question, the questions of interview were constructed in such a way that it tries to provoke physical, sensual, and emotional responses from the side. I tried to make sure that when asked about their memories of the street, it wasn't simply just a listing of things that were there and aren't anymore, but also what those things meant to them personally. So my interview questions were also looking through the lens of perception of spaces and how association memory works with association. So the association in terms of time and emotions, and then time, and then elements of objects, elements of street like object, activity, and people, and then body senses, or when particular element of street is not there, and then how the perception of street changes then. And then when one taking an Ashna case, where she remembers going to Tabela, and then she remembers the ground, and then while telling me the story, she also narrates me that जब भी गिल्ली बारिश की बूंद गिरती थी मिट्टी पे तो बहुत अच्छी स्मेल आती थी, हम बाहर ही रहते थे. So the source of the senses, when they are wiped out or change or move, so that way the perception also changes. So, and through time, that what particular activity would happen at particular time. So these were the three lenses which I was looking through my interviews. Well, they were narrating.
I'd like to respond to the first question. So for me, the again, most of the interviews were basically not interviews, were more like conversations with people who have gone through the transformation. Uh, I tried including different age groups of people and different genders, and how the same space is experienced in different ways by all of them. Like a 18-year-old experiences the same space in a different way compared to a 53-year-old. Yeah, and that's how the space has been made, try to be been made, try to be in sense of.
Thank you. Do we have any more responses, questions that we want to take? Otherwise, we can close. Kush, were you saying something?
Yeah, Vasavika, just one quick note for Neha. Neha, I just want, because I was taking notes as you were presenting, what the inferences that you have, produced but also shared with us today. Street as a place to be, street as a searching ground, street as a place to feel less alone, street as a marker of time, and street as shelter. just hold on to these meanings and see how they travel with you forward as well. Just wanted to sort of emphasize that. Yeah.
Street as in release space would be something where one would just go and have a pause space.
Neha, he's not asking you a question. He's telling you to stay with it. Stay with these concepts that you've come up with.
Yeah, I thought.
Okay, I think we can conclude this panel. I think there are a lot of questions and ideas to work with. We will reconvene for the third panel at 1:45 after lunch. So I hope to see everybody there. And it's the third panel is around spatiality through everyday narratives. So yes, see you all at 1:45.
Thanks, Vastu.
Thank you for the comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.